If you can once again cast your imagination to the desert wastelands and a huge caravan of people. They had wagons this time. They had Egyptians helping them move. You know, Pharaoh's moving company had arrived. And they were moving en masse. Hundreds. Moving down to Egypt. And the whole way, echoing in the minds of the chief men of the group, were the words from their brother. What you meant for evil, God used for good. What you meant for evil. They all could remember betraying him. They could all remember throwing him in a hole. They could all remember selling him off. And yet, when they stood before the most powerful Egyptian in the land, and he revealed himself to be their brother, what they had expected to happen hadn't happened. Their heads were still attached to their bodies. They hadn't been tortured to death. They hadn't been hung out for the birds to pick at and eat. They'd been given goods. They'd been given money. They'd been given forgiveness. They'd been given the wagons that were rolling with them on loan from Pharaoh himself. And down to Egypt they went. What you meant for evil. Our life seems to be filled with those moments that we mean things for evil. Whether it's a small cutting comment or something a little more planned out, a little more elaborate. We have things that we mean for evil all the time in our lives, don't we? Sometimes we're appalled by what others mean for evil. And sometimes we ourselves are the perpetrator. And yet, this phrase overshadows Joseph's whole life, and it overshadows his brothers and his family as they are coming down to Egypt. What you meant for evil, God used for good. And so, we find Jacob traveling to Egypt with his family in chapter 46 of Genesis. With his sons. I don't know exactly how the conversations had gone. We have the record that they told him that Joseph was alive, that he had stood there dumbfounded, unable to speak, and he didn't believe them until they had really convinced him. I don't know if they gave him the full story at that point, or if he only had part of it. But to him it was enough that his son was alive. But you have to look at this man's position. At nearly 130 years old, he thought he would have died a long time ago. Most everybody else thought he would have died a long time ago. He is hoping to see his son before he dies. He's still not sure that he's really alive. But the wagons say different. The Egyptians that have come say different. And so in verse 1 of chapter 46, it says this: So Israel, Jacob, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions in the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. God gives him a promise. Go to Egypt. It'll be okay. You'll make the journey. Joseph will be there at your deathbed, and I will prosper your family. You'll notice that for the first time in his life, Jacob has a good answer to God. When God calls his name, he says, "Here I am." It's kind of a phrase that can infer, what do you need? I am available. The same kind of phrase used by the prophet when God said, "Who shall we send?" And he says, "Here I am, send me." Jacob is available to God for the first time in his life, it seems like. 130 years is a long time to resist the Lord. It's a long time to have promises fulfilled over and over and over and over again. It's a long time to suffer loss and feel that you've lost the pride of your life, your son. And it is a crazy time at the end of which to receive the news that he's really alive, that he's really in command of the most powerful country on earth, and that you're going to get to see him again. Jacob's life is a series of promises from God, and it's a series of promises that can't be ignored. God gives him one more promise. Don't be afraid. You'll make it. Your son will be there. He will see you. He will see you off to eternity. What a night. When everyone got up in the morning, can you imagine that situation? They were moving slowly, taking care of the old and the weary. But that morning, the old and the weary was ready to go. What are you people waiting for? They had to pull the pegs out of the ground. They had to get the tents packed. They had to set things up and start moving again. But it says in verse 5 that Jacob then set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel, and it goes into a list. It's quite a list. He's had quite a family. It has grown. As we go through this, we're going to survey a little bit. We're going to jump just a little. Jacob and Joseph meet each other once again. It says in verse 29 of chapter 46 that Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and I will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are in the land of Canaan have come to me." And then he gives them instructions for how to meet Pharaoh. I'm going to tell him that you're shepherds. When you meet him, tell him that you guys herd livestock. Because if you tell him that you're just sheep herders, that's offensive to Egyptians. They don't like that. So don't do that. It's kind of an interesting situation. The Egyptians looked on sheep herders as unclean, basically, as filthy, as stinky as a slave's job. And so Joseph is careful to kind of present things in a certain light without lying about it. He's going to tell Pharaoh in private that his family, they are shepherds. But in public, before Pharaoh, they're supposed to say, "We're livestock herders." It's the truth. But here we are. I like to focus on a couple of interactions here with Jacob, because really, as much as this is the story of Joseph, this is the story of Jacob and the end of his life. And he says, I can die now. It's okay. I can go on to God knowing that you are okay. Knowing that my family is provided for. But he's not quite done yet. Are we ever quite done yet? Not until, what's the old expression? Jokingly about, opera. It's now kind of politically incorrect. It's not over until the fat lady sings. When you have the large opera singers up on stage, there's always people would joke about it. It's not over until she finishes the song. But there's a certain amount of truth to that. It's not over until it's over, right? Jacob is relieved. He's ready to be done, but it's not quite over yet. He still has to meet Pharaoh. And this is an interesting interaction. He has two things left in his life that he's going to do: meet Pharaoh and bless Joseph's children, really, and make sure there's peace within his family. A guy who has never stood for peace, who's taken the path of manipulation, the path of least resistance, who's meant things for evil all his life in a way, who's been very selfish in his life after 130 years of tempering, has a little different interaction now. You'll notice his interaction with God is, here I am. What do you need? His interaction with Pharaoh is equally different from before. In chapter 47, it records that Joseph went in to told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds, all they possess, have come. They are here. Your servants are shepherds, is what his brothers say when they answer Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, what do you do? We are shepherds, as our fathers were. We have taken care of livestock. That's what we do. Pharaoh gives them a job. He says, settle in the best land. Tells Joseph, here's a command for you. I'm still king. You may run things, but I'm still king. Here's a command for you. Settle your family in the best land. Take care of them. And by the way, since they're such good herders of livestock, give them a job. Put them in charge of my livestock. It's a long way from the slavery of future years in which they're making bricks. He's attempting to honor them. And he honors them to the point where, in verse 7, if you will look at chapter 47, there's another interaction here. Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? If you can imagine it, this may very well be the second Pharaoh Joseph is serving. He is probably a little bit younger, and as Jacob enters the room, he goes, this is one old dude. This guy is old. How old are you? He doesn't, he's already gotten the kind of profession question out of the way with his sons. So he's here, how old are you? What have you seen in your life? It's kind of a probing question, really. What are the years of your life? How many of the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. In other words, I haven't accomplished much. My time has been mostly spent on me. It doesn't compare to what my fathers have done. You want a real story? Look at Abraham. Jacob has finally, after 130 years, come to a position where he understands that it's not about him. How long will that take you? How long will that take me? To come to a position where we realize it's not about us. And we realize that God is in control. And we realize the blessings of God. God has sent a Savior. God has accomplished mighty things. God cares for you. Think about the interactions here. You have three real moments. Joseph's interaction with his father. His father's interaction with Pharaoh. These are a couple of key moments. And Jacob's interaction with God. What do we have here? His interaction with God is, here I am, I'm available. His interaction with Pharaoh is, there's not much to tell about me. You're on a real good story. My grandfather defeated kings with God's power. My grandfather saved kings with God's power. My grandfather was kicked out of Egypt because he lied to you, your great-grandfather. And by the way, yeah, the plague was on your house, nothing big. He doesn't go through that whole history, but God has accomplished great things through Abraham. He's accomplished great things through Isaac. I'm just Jacob. What a difference. Can you see that difference in this man? What are the stories we have of him? Manipulating, stealing his brother's birthright after kind of making a contract on it. But then he kind of chisels it out because his father's not willing to go along with that, nor is his brother. He is manipulated. He is manipulated into having to work extra to get the wife he wanted. But he focuses all his attention on the one and neglects the other. He focuses his attention on one son and neglects his other children. Jacob has had a lot of issues in his life. His sons have done dreadful things. They massacred an entire village because the mood struck them. They sold their brother off and told him that an animal had eaten him. It wasn't just their own evil, that was a legacy from their father. But here and now, it's different. One beautiful thing about God's Word are the stories of those who have come to the Lord at the last moment. Well, it's the old phrase, the last minute of the 11th hour. There's an old phrase that came from the end of World War I because of when the armistice went into effect at midnight and the guns fell silent. At the very end, they were still fighting. And then it stopped. When you have the situation of Christ and he's being crucified, and you look at the two that were crucified with him, and the thief says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom, because you're the king. You don't deserve to be here like we do." And Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." Talk about a guy who had accomplished nothing in his life that was good. But the thing is, it's not about our goodness, it's about the God we serve. My goodness isn't enough to accomplish anything. My God's greatness is enough to accomplish everything. And Jacob is seeing this accomplished at the end of his life. What a wondrous reward. His son is restored, he sees his family provided for, and he knows that they will multiply and that they will come back up out of Egypt. That God will be with them. This is an amazing, amazing promise. There are a couple of other interesting things at the end of Genesis here, but these are the key interactions. There is a little bit of history here that records something about Egypt. It records something about Joseph. And you can understand the Exodus far better if you understand this part of what happened. If you look at verse 13 of chapter 47, it's almost like it's inserted into the story because there's just this little side detail of how things went. It says this, there was no food at all in the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, in other words, when Pharaoh's house was busting with money and nobody else had any, here's the result. The Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes, for our money is gone?" And Joseph answered, "Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph. Joseph gave them food in exchange for all their livestock that year. When the year was ended, they came to him the following year and said, "We can't hide from my lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our land." Again, the question, why should we die before you? Both we and our land. Buy us and our land for food, and we, with our land, will be servants to Pharaoh. Pharaoh had been an average king up until this point. But now, they gratefully sell all their money to Pharaoh. He's got it. They gratefully sell all their livestock to Pharaoh. He's got it. Now he's a feudal lord. They sell their land and themselves. The power of Pharaoh had expanded to a point that had never been matched before. It's cemented in his own land. His people are grateful, but he is in control of all of it. You look at how he looked at the Pharaoh later, looks at the children of Israel as slaves, and you can see in a way why. Because everyone is Pharaoh's slave at this point. Notice something else. In Joseph's life, he never departed from being a slave. Now he was the greatest slave in all the land. There was only one person whose word was higher than his, and that was Pharaoh. And he had Pharaoh's ear. Why? Because he was making Pharaoh the most powerful man in the world. When the children of Israel leave, you'll see in the Exodus that they leave and God extracts a little bit of the price here. They had forgotten Joseph. Pharaoh had forgotten that he owed Joseph his power. He owed Joseph's people his power. He owed Joseph's God his power. And when God takes the Israelites out, what does he take? The money of Egypt, the livestock of Egypt, the power, the land, the people. But here at this point in time is a wonderful thing. It is a beautiful moment that Joseph has saved the world, his family is secure, and they are here. Jacob gives his sons a particular blessing, and we'll finish with this fourth interaction. Jacob has interacted with God and is at peace with God. Jacob has interacted with Joseph and is at peace with him. He's interacted with Pharaoh and is at peace with Pharaoh. You notice there's a wrapping here. God is so gracious. And it says this about Jacob in chapter 49. He called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in the days to come." He acts the part of a prophet here. And he says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up your father's bed and you defiled it." And then he gives him a little bit of a slap across the back of the head for acts that Reuben had committed. "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul not come into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen." In other words, the act of crippling animals in order to harm someone else. They're cruel. That's what it comes down to. He goes through this list. "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. They'll be in amongst. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah." Remember, Judah is the tribe of the rulers of Israel. David's tribe. He continues that tribute shall come to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. In other words, that purple royal color. Royalty is his destiny. "Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea, shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon." He's kind of assigning the land a little bit here. I love Issachar here in verse 14, because this is what I always aspire to be called. He is a strong donkey. Crouching between the sheepfolds, he saw that the resting place was good and the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. In other words, he's going to be a worker. "Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels." This is the most interesting blessing list I've ever heard. It's like you guys still have some issues. And the consequences of those issues will be these things. But remember what's still echoing in their ears. What had to still be echoing in their ears. Even as they got together, as Jacob passed, and came to Joseph and said, "You know, he said you shouldn't hurt us for what we did to you." And Joseph's like, facepalm, "Guys, don't you get it?" That same phrase, what God meant, what you meant for evil, God used for good. He gives this whole list, and at the end, he gives a long praise of Joseph. I can only imagine that the other brothers standing around had to roll their eyes at this point. A little bit, but not too much, because Joseph has all the power. Joseph is a fruitful bough in verse 22. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved, and his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, in other words, God. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings the breasts and the womb, fertility, in other words. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents. Up to the bounties of the everlasting hills may they be on the head of Joseph, on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. And his brothers had to be doing this. But you know, in the back of their mind, they knew who they were, they knew what they had done. what you meant for evil, God has used for good. And their father closes his eyes and is gathered to his people after blessing Joseph's sons. Look at verse 15 of chapter 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to him saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph," they make it up, "Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of God, of the God of your father." And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came down and fell before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph stands in the position of Christ. And this is the message of God for you. And he weeps as we continue to push the envelope against him, and as we continue to misunderstand who he is. At this point, Joseph had to be you just want to shake them. You guys are still hung up on this. You're still stuck here. What you meant for evil, God used for good. I am not in the place of God. Do not fear. But he is God's representative, and what will he do? Provide for them. God provides for you. He provides for me. He provides rain on the just and the unjust, as it says. He provides for us. But let me ask you, when will you finally have these interactions? When will you be at peace with God because you have recognized he calls to you, "Here I am"? When will you be in that position of realizing that it's what he's done for you? And perhaps you are in the position of Joseph and you have the power in your hand. You owe somebody else. And you have the power. But you realize that what others have meant for evil, God will use for good. So forgive them as he has forgiven you. It's a powerful, powerful end to these two men's lives. We don't have much on Joseph from there other than he died. And they took his body when they left Egypt. He served several pharaohs and was famous in the land, and then he was forgotten, as celebrity goes. But the story of Joseph is one of faithfulness and forgiveness, one of recognizing the sovereignty of God. What more is there to the story of Genesis? The beginnings. The sovereignty of God, God's faithfulness, and his forgiveness. The same story that we get in the gospel. God hasn't changed between the Old and New Testaments. What a God we serve. Let's have a word of prayer.